Dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to introduce you Yasar Qatarneh, one of the leading Middle Eastern experts, originally from Jordan, living in Jordan, but the person who has his brains and heart and involvement in many countries across the region. So it's not just the academic, despite of all his long career in this sphere as well, but also the person who is very practical in the Middle Eastern politics. Publicly, we're usually presenting him as the senior advisor to the Martti Ahtisaari Center. Their consultant for the Middle East, the person who is involved in different second-track diplomacy meetings, negotiations, groupings around there, who created with us the Ukraine Middle East expert platform a year ago. But previously, for many years, he was direct for the Regional Center on Conflict Prevention at the Jordan Institute of Diplomacy. And also he was a research fellow at the Center for Strategic Studies at the University of Jordan. He studied in the United Kingdom and doing his PhD there and the master's. He spent a lot of time as the consultant for the business and for the governments. So his experience in the region, in the wider Black Sea region, is quite an extensive. And that's why it was my pleasure that Yasar agreed to join us today and to give us his subjective view over the Middle East, how he emphasized usually that it is not one Middle East. There are so many different processes happening there, but we will try to fit it in one lecture and conversations. He would highly appreciate as many as possible of your questions, because we understand that it's impossible just in a lecture to cover everything. But he also asked a favor that would be easier for him, that you briefly introduce with one sentence yourself. So for him, it would be not just names on the dark, but a little bit of who you are. So you can say in the same manner as I will introduce myself. I'm Dr. Hannah Sheles, Director for Security Studies and Global Outreach at the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism, and I'm in Odessa. So let's go. You don't need to raise the hands. Probably we see each other in the same way. So let's start from Tatiana.
Nice to meet you. My name is Tatiana, and I'm studying at the University in Kiev. My major is Chinese and literature, and now I'm an intern at the New Geopolitical Research Network. It's a Ukrainian think tank, and I'm researching China's information policy. Nice to meet you.
Anna.
Yeah, hello, my name is Anna, and I am an analyst at Ukrainian Institute. It is basically the governmental agency which main focus is cultural diplomacy, culture and arts, the perspective of Ukraine abroad. And we are trying to kind of tell a lot more about Ukraine abroad and build connections, cultural connections in the first place. And I'm based in Kyiv.
Maria.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you. My name is Maria Lavrova, and I'm a first year student of Odessa of International Relations of Odessa National University, and also I study and teach Turkish. And of course, because of that, I'm interested in like researching and studying its foreign policy, especially its interests in Black Sea region, Middle East, and the South Caucasus. Thank you.
Tatiana.
Thank you. My name is Tatiana, and I'm an international relations major. I specialize in the area of Indo-Pacific, and I just finished my BA studies. I'm based in Kiev right now, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Yegor? We don't have.
Yeah, sure. Hello, my name is Yegor. I'm an analyst at Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism, working on a variety of different projects, but in particular on the global outreach program, within which we are organizing this summer school. And yes, I'm also currently based in Kyiv and pursuing my PhD in international relations here.
Artyom?
Good. Sorry. Let's go.
It's okay. Good afternoon. My name is Artem. I'm a fifth-year student of international relations at the Institute of International Relations in Kyiv. I was born and I'm from Zaporizhia, a city on the south of Ukraine, but currently I'm in Kyiv, and I'm taking my internship in Ukrainian Prism on matters of Africa. Nice to meet you.
Another Artyom?
Yes, thanks. Good evening. My name is Artem, and I'm actually a student at the State University of Trade and Economic, based in Kiev, and I'm an international law student. That's I'm a lawyer. I also was an intern at the MFA, and it's a great experience, and I want to be connected with diplomacy and etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexander wrote that he cannot speak, but he introduced that he's also international relations master in Kyiv National University and work as a journalist in Ukrainian media. And I see that Anna lost connection. She will join us later, but Anna is the intern with us at Ukrainian Prism and also finishing her master's in the Arabic studies, the international relations. So we have few people who know a little bit of the Middle East, but others with the Indo-Pacific more over here. And yet one person is not here who is Latin America. So Yasar, now they are all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And hello, everyone from Amman, Jordan, sunny Amman. It's a pleasure to meet with you. Thank you so much, Hannah, for providing me with this opportunity. I've never been in touch with Ukrainians before, other than Hannah and few colleagues through this project that we have at CMI. Other than that, Ukraine was, for me, a kind of a mystery that is connected with two things, Khrushchev and Chernobyl. So it shows how little we know about Ukraine in Jordan and in the Arab world. Of course, that is not a reflection of the importance of Ukraine as much as, we have a lot in our plate in the Middle East to worry about. So it was not only until the war in February 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, 22 or 23? 22. 23. See, we have a lot in the region that we cannot even remember the exact dates. When people started to have alarm calls about what's going on, what is this that is happening, and we realized that we really know very little about Ukraine. So it is a pleasure to engage with you guys, especially young, interested people at your age who is trying to figure out how to reach out to the globe and how to represent Ukraine. And therefore, it would be very important from my own perspective to make sure that, you understand the Middle East as much good and enough and fair as possible. As Hannah said, it is very difficult to basically talk about the Middle East, because from all perspectives, it is so complicated, it is so interconnected, it is so different, be it geographically, be it politically, be it economically. So therefore, we will try our best in this, let's say, in this 1 hour that we have together, to dissect as much possible what we could see as the most important things that you should know about the Middle East. Therefore, it is very important to also depend on what kind of questions and interests and concerns and curiosities you might have about the Middle East, and try to answer with as much objectivity as possible. First and foremost, what do we mean by the Middle East? You know, geographically speaking, do we talk about the Middle East that include Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan? So do we talk about North Africa? Do we talk about the Nile Basin? So is it the so-called Middle East? Or when it comes to, I mean, from a Ukrainian perspective, or when it comes to Ukrainian dynamics and interests, it's mainly the Gulf, the Near East, including Iran and Turkey. The thing is, of course, the Middle East is all what has been said about. It is from as far in the west as Morocco to Afghanistan. And some people even call it WANA, not MENA. They call it WANA to mean West Asia and North Africa. When you talk about West Asia, this means that Pakistan and Afghanistan are included as well. Or some people recently, especially after the conflicts and the connectivity between the Gulf and the Horn of Africa through the Red Sea, started to include the Horn of Africa and the Greater Horn of Africa, which means Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, together with Yemen. So the thing is, if you want to understand the Middle East as such as it is presented and talked about in the media, we have to understand the dynamics that is taking place in all these parts of the so-called Greater Middle East. Not to be experts in the Middle East in each conflict, but at least to try to dissect in a way that would be good enough for us to understand what's going on. Because we cannot understand what's going on in Somalia or in north of Iraq if we don't have a clear idea about dynamics between Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, for instance, let alone Ethiopia. So therefore, the least information and observation and follow-up by us on these dynamics and conflicts in the region is very important. Now, of course, in this current presentation, we won't be able to discuss all these conflicts and all these dynamics. But at least we need to make sure that we touch upon the three important levels when we talk about the Middle East. And these are the national level, the regional level, and the international level. Nationally speaking, we have a lot of conflicts to worry about, starting from Palestine in the Middle East, to Syria, the very recent one, to Yemen, let alone in Iraq, Libya, Sudan. These are all national case studies of serious, deep conflicts and even civil war and war. Of course, Lebanon could be also a national case study. However, Lebanon is much more at the edge of the regional level because of the deep involvement of regional actors in the war in Lebanon. I'm not saying that there are no involvement by regional actors in Palestine or in Libya or in Yemen, but in Lebanon, it has been the case for the last 40 years, where even 100 years, where international and regional actors have a great say in what goes on in Lebanon. At the regional level, I think until the last war, the 12-day war by Israel against Iran, we could have said that the region is divided into two camps, the so-called moderate camps and the resistance camp. Moderate camp led by countries like Saudi Arabia, by the United Arab Emirates, by Israel, to a certain extent, Jordan and Egypt. And I don't think they have been aligned at a tactical level, more at a strategic level, meaning strategically they are all allies of the US. However, they have a lot of different, in fact, opposing and conflicting agendas among themselves. Unlike the opposite camp, the resistance camp led by Iran, because it's much more harmonic and much more aligned in terms of their strategic and their regional interests and agenda. So the resistance camp led by Iran, constituted of Syria until the regime of Bashar al-Assad fell in December, of Iraq until now, at least somehow to a certain extent, Lebanon during Hezbollah, which has been now not the case since October, Yemen. These could be all these countries. Some of us would like to call them proxies of Iran. I don't like the word proxies as much as it is somehow a reflection of a certain extent of their nature of these actors, but we better address them as countries, whether in Lebanon or in Syria or in Iraq or in Yemen. These countries and these actors that form the resistance camp led by Iran have been acting in a much more coordinated and much more harmonious manner than that of the moderate camp. Therefore, this has always been an advantage that tilted to the towards the resistance camp in terms of the balance of power, because it is not a secret that the combined power and forces of the moderate camp, be it Israel, be it Saudi Arabia, be it Egypt, exceed way much more than that of Iran and its actors and allies. However, the fact that the resistance camp have always been in full coordination together, unlike the moderate camp, gave them the advantage to basically manage to maneuver the balance of power that was not in their favor in the last 30 years. This has changed or has been influenced by huge development, especially in the last year until 2 weeks ago. And the question is how far we should continue to expect having the so-called resistance camp still up and running with regional influence as it used to be in the last 2 decades. So this is the major shift that the region is witnessing right now. This is what we could expect when we listen to people like Netanyahu, like Trump talking about the new structure of the Middle East. This is where we should also be thinking of maybe it is not enough to not include Afghanistan and especially Pakistan when we talk about Middle East dynamics from now on, because the 12-day war really presented the case of the nuclear deterrence and the nuclear politics as becoming the major point of interest for the US and its allies in the region. Therefore, we cannot exclude a nuclear country like Pakistan that is close to the region to be included in the regional new balance of power setup that we are expecting to happen. So, nationally speaking, as we said, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, the 3 major conflict areas in the Near East that we should focus on, or at least I know better than my knowledge on Sudan and Libya, are still the major cases that we need to keep an eye on. Regionally speaking, we need to keep an eye on the future of the resistance camp led by Iran and what could be coming out of the war between Israel and Iran. As far as Iran is concerned, how much destruction Iran did face and did go through. Is it going to be able to maintain its influence in the region or not? This is all something that we need to keep an eye on. The third level, the international level, is of course the US, China, Russia, and the EU. And not to waste your time, I've always been an advocate of the region to be a Pax Americana and to continue to be a Pax Americana, meaning the US is the only superpower that really matters in the Middle East. All the talks about China, Russia, the EU, in my opinion, has always been a kind of speaking of detailed, trying to draw a detailed picture that, that involves a lot of futuristic foresight scenarios without any kind of direct realistic impact in the present moment, be it Russia especially or China. Russia, of course, I'm not saying is not having an influence, but where is Russia after Syria? Where is Russia after what happened to Iran? Where has been Russia for Iran? So those who have been talking about the impact of Russian influence in the region, I think this has always been an exaggeration. And I am not an expert on Russian politics, but I've never believed in Russia being influential enough to go against the wishes of the US. For China, again, where has been China in the war on Gaza? Where has been China in Syria? Where has been China with the war against Iran 2 weeks ago? When I ask where has been China, meaning did China have any agenda that did go or will go against the wishes and the interests of the US? Clearly, even if it has, clearly it did not show any kind of resistance or any kind of a reaction that will try to tilt the balance of power against the US wishes. So, of course, from that perspective, I've always been an advocate of the fact that the US is the only superpower that matters in the Middle East. Now, when you talk to the regimes in the Middle East, be it in Riyadh, be it in Cairo, be it in Baghdad, be it in Abu Dhabi or Doha, you can tell that, yes, maybe China is a hedging instrument for us with the Americans, but it is not the strategic ally. It is the US. Russia, to a lesser extent, a hedging, and also not only hedging instrument, but also maybe a kind of military defense weapons that could be a good source to maintain if needed, let alone the energy angle. And more important than anything else, especially in the Gulf, the money laundering thing, so-called investments. I think the file of Russian money in the Gulf, especially in the Emirates, is the big elephant in the room that nobody has basically explored clearly and publicly. It's billions of dollars that is present in the Emirati financial system with the knowledge and approval of the US. So therefore, in my opinion, internationally or at the international level, the US is the actor who calls the shots in the region. Now, if you want us to laugh and smile, if I want to be appropriate, let's talk about Europe in the Middle East. Europe in the Middle East is a joke. Europe in the Middle East is a joke that, unfortunately, Berlin and Paris are still not aware that, you know, they no longer have any influence whatsoever. That was clear in war in Gaza, clear in Lebanon, very clear in Damascus after the fall of the regime. And of course, we have seen how little impact they had in Iran. Now, of course, when I say a joke, I mean basically Berlin and Paris and Brussels can try their best to push for certain refinement of policies that they see the Americans are working in a way that could harm the so-called European interests. But I don't think they can be equally positioned in the Middle East as if they are another pillar against the US. So they are not even a pillar as maybe China could be. So I see Russia and Europeans in the Middle East are really enjoying an exaggerated potential that do not reflect the reality of their interests and their power. So again, if you want to see how far the region is going to basically enjoy, let's say, a regional detente, enjoy a kind of security cooperation that will guarantee some peace and cooperation in the Middle East. I think we are far from that, not because I'm pessimistic, but because I don't think that the Americans, being the main and only superpower that has the impact to call the shots in the region, have a lot of work to do to balance the asymmetric interest agendas among its own allies in the region. Therefore, there is a lot to be done by Washington in order to make sure that all their allies are going to come to term in terms of how to maintain a regional detente, a regional cooperation setup that will provide the region, its countries, and its people with some kind of peace and prosperity. Of course, this, in my opinion, will always have an impact on Ukraine. Now, I think you are in a better position to tell us what do you see in terms of the recent dynamics in the Middle East and how they impacted the war in Ukraine. But at least in this part of the world, many said that the absence of Russia with Iran in the last war was the price that they got in order to have a free hand or a freer hand in Ukraine against the Ukrainians. Now, these are all rumors. Nobody can say that has been the case. So as long as Russia is still having a role, as long in the Middle East, of course, to say the least, this will always mean that the Middle East dynamics will always have an impact on Ukraine. I don't think, I mean, if I have something that I missed, more than happy to be raised and I can answer or address directly. But this is, Hannah, what I think could briefly give a picture but I hope it was clear enough and not confusing to our colleagues here in the room.
So the proposal is, as usually, you have your possibility for raising hands. So use this function for those who are ready to ask the questions. And while you are finding the bottom, Yasar, let me start with the one question. If I would ask you, what are the three main issues we need to follow the next year about the Middle East? What would you tell us?
Thank you very much. The first one is the future of the so-called peace process between Israel and the rest of the Arab countries. How is it going to settle down? Be it the end of war in Gaza, be it the continuation of normalization with the rest of Arab regimes, and be it with basically the role that Israel might be allowed to play in the near future in terms of becoming a regional hegemon, replacing Iran. So I would ask every one of us to keep an eye on the dynamics of the so-called, potentially, the Israeli era in the region. Is it going to be allowed or not after the elimination or after the weakening of Iran and the resistance camp? Would Egypt allow that? Would Saudi Arabia allow that? Would Turkey allow that? So, of course, very much linked with, if Israel wants and aspire to play that such a role, very much linked with the peace process and the peace settlement. And this is one important thing. Another one is the future of nuclear weapons as a deterrence or deterring instrument. What is the, we have a big question mark on this sudden surprising visit of Pakistan's chief army to meet with Trump in the White House alone. So the timing is very surprising. Second, the fact that he came alone, not with any official civilian Pakistani politician. So this means deterrence and nuclear weapon and nuclear power is going to be another issue to be monitored, because this will have an impact on how far Turkey would go nuclear, how far Saudi Arabia would go nuclear. And if this happens, at least as far as Turkey is concerned, yes, Turkey is part of the NATO, but we have witnessed that Turkey could sometimes play solo when it comes to its utmost national security. And the nuclear aspiration that Turkey might have would have definitely an impact on the Balkan and, of course, Ukraine. The third is the US dynamics in making sure to maintain the balance between their major strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific region vis-a-vis the Middle East. I think the Middle East proved to be, if you guys remember, during the Cold War, the number one region for the US, strategically speaking, was West Europe. Number two was the Middle East, maybe to a certain extent, jointly with East Asia. Now, I think number one for the US is not Europe, and it's not the Middle East, it's East Asia, as far as the Indo-Pacific dynamics are concerned. Number two is proving to be the Middle East. So this is where Europe comes last, strategically speaking. Therefore, the dynamics of the US presence, strategically speaking, in the Middle East is the third thing that we need to keep an eye on. So I think I'm not saying that anything not mentioned is not important, but at least what I have in mind is the fact that US in the Middle East is there to protect Israel, is there to deter and contain its enemies, adversaries. On top now is Iran. And number three, to protect its allies in the Gulf. Not to protect, to appease, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, because he's a transactional businessman. So he would like always to make sure he can appease his allies. So these three elements of US strategy would mean that, okay, when it comes to protecting Israel, as I said, Israel would basically be number one to keep an eye on the role of Israel in the future. As far as deterring and containing the adversaries, Iran and the nuclear. As far as the Gulf is concerned, it's the Indo-Pacific and the connectivities and the, all these ideas of new, what they call them in English, I forgot. The Indian, Middle East, European corridors, the economic corridors. Technically speaking, it is about these corridors, but this is strategically speaking very much linked into the interregional dynamics between the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East and East Africa. So these are the three main areas that I would keep an eye on and follow up on them.
And probably as a small clarification, because for the several times you mentioned Turkey, and we understand that, especially because of Syria, Turkey became more and more involved in the Middle East, and Turkey is an important actor for Ukraine as well. So it is important for us to understand about them. But how the Middle East see Turkey? Is it accepted as the regional player? Or let's say Syria is not enough to be accepted as the part of the Middle East?
Well, it's not for us to decide what Turkey wants to be. I think there is a big divide inside Turkey about the direction of its future. There are people who say Turkey belongs to the West, and there are forces that say, no, Turkey belongs to the East. As far as we are concerned, Turkey has also been, the role of Turkey in the Middle East has also been disproportionate and exaggerated. Because, in reality, we saw Turkey in Gaza had so little influence. Turkey in Syria was very much a matter of national security. Therefore, fine, you can play a role, but they cannot be the actor in Syria. Yes, they can, of course, be influential in addition to Saudi Arabia, in addition to Israel, in addition to, maybe the EU, as far as the US see who should basically play a role. But it was clear that Turkey was not, as we always thought, oh my God, they are expanding all over the region. They are in Somalia, they are everywhere. No. Turkey proved to many of the Arab governments that, they have their limits and they have their weaknesses and they have their own problems. So Turkey is not going to be dominating or does not have the capacity to play a hegemonic role in terms of the region, the way that some people used to talk about it less than a decade ago. So therefore, you can see that many governments, many Arab capitals are willing and are actually, in fact, playing very pragmatic and interest-based game with Ankara, be it in Riyadh, be it in Abu Dhabi, of course, Doha and Cairo and Amman. So as long as they play within the game and the rules of the game in the region, I think the Arab governments stop to have these, concerns and myths about Turkey's role as a new hegemonic power in the region.
Anna, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for such a brief and saturated introduction to the region. I am new to it, so it was a pleasure to hear about it. I have a question regarding the issue of indigenous peoples, and my question would be to what extent, if at all, the discourse on indigenous peoples and their resistance is present in the Middle East, in the network of, I don't know, some actors within Middle East. And also, is there any knowledge on Crimean Tatar there? Kind of, especially
Sorry, about what?
Crimean Tatars. Yeah. So again, for me, it's also the issue of religion and the connection here. And I've been just wondering if there have any knowledge or recognition, introduction to the history. I know not very deep history, but nevertheless, the history of Crimean Tatars or just Tatars again. Thank you.
Do you want me to go question by question or okay?
Yeah, probably, because the questions would be different. It would be easier.
Okay. I don't know. Thank you, Anna. I don't know what you mean by indigenous people in the Middle East. I mean, if you have a specific case in mind, are you talking about Kurds in Syria and Iraq? Are you talking about some so-called minorities? What do you mean by indigenous?
No. I mean, like Kurds and others. But again, it's not. For me, it's not the question about it's more a conceptual question, I think, because I'm just wondering if in the Middle East this category exists as is, just a category of indigenous peoples, the discourse on indigenous peoples, because again, it is something that is very present in Ukraine, and we are kind of trying to bring it to the world and to claim ourselves as very conscious about the issue in Latin America, for example, but I'm not sure about the Middle East. So I've been just wondering how you can address this.
No, I think indigenous is not going to be an accurate word to be used in the Middle East, because basically indigenous more applicable on colonies and the New World, be it in South America or in Australia. I would say maybe in the Middle East, it could be more relevant to talk about certain ethnic or religious minorities, and especially ethnic minorities more than religious, because religious minorities are not the proportion of these religious minorities are not big enough to be posing a controversial situation. Maybe in Lebanon, yes, it is 1/3 of the population that are Christians, but in Syria, for instance, they are less than 10%. In Iraq, the same. In the rest of the Arab world, very little, except for Egypt, you have almost 10%. So therefore, this concept of religious minority is always perceived by a kind of a conspiracy by external actors who want to create an influence and basically establish and plant a proxy within these countries in order to basically implement certain agendas. So the perception of minorities in general are very negative in the Arab world, both by people and by societies and governments. Because the West has not been playing this game in a very smart way and have been very insensitive to certain cultural sensitivities. Especially when you talk about now, for instance, the sexual minorities, talking about the LGBTQ. Suddenly, the West comes into the Arab public opinion and agenda that is as if all the Arabs are, almost half of them are LGBTQ, and therefore we should take care of them. And we don't have any problem in the region except to worry about the rights of these people. Whereas in Syria, you have 12 million people, refugees who are homeless, these are not important, or at least LGBTQ is important as the refugees. So there is a kind of insensitivity by the West that distorted the perception of the Arab people towards minorities. Now, religious minorities is not the concern, because people in the Arab world believe that we can observe, we can contain the religious minorities. But ethnic minorities is a stronger case, meaning the Kurds in Iraq and Syria, meaning the Nubians in Sudan and in Egypt, some Persians in the Gulf. Yeah, these are, I have to say, are cases that have certain dynamics, but it's not publicly discussed, at least in Egypt, in Sudan. No, in Sudan now they have a war, so they discuss everything. In Egypt and in the Gulf. But of course, Kurds in Iraq and Syria, they have been a big issue, especially in Iraq. And they are at least well addressed as far as the Kurds are concerned in Iraq. But also these minorities or these ethnic communities are not the problem of the Arab world. Yes, they are a problem for the Middle East, because Turkey is part of the Middle East and they have a huge problem of ethnic minorities, especially the Kurds. In Iran as well, So it is not an issue that only Arab countries are worried about, and they feel that also the West, as far as they are concerned, especially the US, as much as they could be eager about religious and social minorities, you could see that they are, careless when it comes to ethnic minorities, especially the Kurds, as long as this card is playing towards their own agenda of interests. So that's why the Arab governments are not that concerned, because they know it is a international, to say the least, regional question rather than a national problem. Now, for the Tatar, unfortunately, I have to say, the knowledge about them is very little in the Arab world. It all started thanks to the war in Ukraine. People started to learn about, just like the Americans when, after 9/11, they never thought of the Arab world and Islam. After 9/11, they started to read about it. And for us, we started to realize that, okay, as I told many times my friend Hannah, that my neighbor, opposite flat, in my building, the couple, both of their mothers are Ukrainians. They are half Ukrainians. We never knew that. We knew that we used to call Ukraine anything from the Soviet Union Russian. So we used to say, oh, these are Russians, until the war started. Okay, there is a difference between Russia and Ukraine, and there is a big, big difference. And when we started to learn more and more, let alone to learn or to know anything about Crimea or about the Tatar, we know very little, unfortunately, very little. But this has changed. And, once you start to know about things, you cannot go back. It only escalate and become bigger and bigger.
Yana.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the insights you shared with us today. And I've got a question about the EU. You mentioned that it's largely absent from the foreign policy processes in the Middle East. And from your point of view, what explains this absence? Is it like lack of interest, or I don't know, maybe weak foreign policy of the EU, or maybe it's generally lack of trust from regional actors? And the following question is, in the context of new Syria, let's like new Syrian government, how would you assess the current influence of external actors among, I don't know, like Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the West, with the current authorities? And do you see any space or need for the EU to be there? Because, well, I can just add a few things that, as I've seen, a few leaders from the EU countries have visited Syria, and I thought if it was a question of refugees, because it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was a person from Annalena Baerbock from Germany and some other people, but I'm not sure if it's more about the issue of refugees or it's just the sign that the EU thinks about being an actor in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Yana. I think first on the EU, well, I'm not an expert on the EU politics and in Europe, but at least from my own experience and interaction with European colleagues in Brussels, I think the EU has a lot of problems itself, you know, starting with Russia and Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, let alone to the domestic politics that is creating a lot of serious fundamental structural divides within each country between the right and the left, and therefore the asymmetries between both camps in each country when it comes to domestic politics and foreign policy are huge. So a right government in Stockholm would mean and imply certain diplomatic foreign policy directions that are totally different, if not opposite, of a left wing. So this have created a decreasing credibility of European countries' diplomacy, because governments started to realize in the region that we cannot take any government seriously, because if this government changes in 2 years or 3 years, it could mean a totally different U-turn or a different opposite direction of what we had agreed on. So this, at a long-term level, developed or established this escalating lack of reliability and credibility. The second thing is the normative approach of the EU. The normative approach that has proved to be, especially after the war in Ukraine, that is so double standard and so hypocritical for many Arab governments and people. So the same people who have a certain normative approach that we all agree and we all believe in, I mean, Arab people, as long as the people, laymen, the normal people in the street, we're totally against the fact that Russia can intervene and occupy another country, because this has been a problem that they have been suffering from for the last 80 years. Yes, of course, there has been a propaganda, there has been certain rumors and packages talking about, it's not about Ukraine, Russia was defending itself against NATO, This changed the dynamics of the perception of the war in Ukraine. But in principle, they all believe that what is going on in Ukraine is wrong. Okay, and they saw how steadfast the Europeans were towards these ethical problems and normative problems that Russia has established and created in Ukraine. However, at the same time, when the same people in Europe, the officials, approach the region, the opposite. They dropped all these normative principles that they have been talking about. So this really escalated the process of lack of credibility. So I'm not saying it suddenly happened. It has started in the last 2 decades that EU does not matter that much. Therefore, EU realized that maybe bilaterally could have some kind of credibility with poor countries like Jordan, through economic aid programs, 200, 100, 300 million euros in, in aid for the government. That's the leverage that they are left with. But when it comes to strategic alignment, repositioning, I don't think they have any say. On Syria, come on, Yana, look at the news. Mr. Trump decided to start lifting the sanctions against Syria. Boom. Things are changing in Syria. So whereas the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, God knows who from Europe came, yeah, you can come and, have vocal, let's say, impact that will disappear in 2 days. And talk about Germany believes in the right of all Syrians to live jointly, equally, in prosperity and peace. Yeah, thank you very much. Done? Finished? Okay. Nice meeting you. See you back. Because at the end of the day, the Germans need Syrians, not vice versa. Syrians would look at you if you offer them any way out of sanctions. Do you think Germans can help them in that? Do you think Brussels can help them on that? Whereas the Germans see the Syrians, you're talking about 12 million refugees, Syrian refugees, and Syrian refugees are not simply, I don't want to name countries, but they are really hardworking people and very serious. And they, whenever they settle somewhere, they make a difference. They establish themselves in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey. 4 million Syrian refugees in Turkey change a lot of how the Turks perceive refugees. Why? Do they think they are different culturally? No, because they matter economically. If they come to Kiev, you will in 2 years, 3 years, notice that, oh my God, Syrian restaurants, Syrian shops, Syrian, so they have an impact. So what can you do with these Syrian refugees in Europe? Germany and France and Italy would really need the Syrian government's help. So therefore, the Syrians know, and the new regime in Syria know that, okay, it is you who need us, not vice versa. In fact, they have a potential to align with Ukraine way much more than the potential that they have with the rest of European governments.
Alexander?
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for your speech. It was really interesting. And my question is about the relations between Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. Because personally, for me, it seems that they are kind of pre-revolutionary situation in Egypt and Jordan because very huge economical crisis, very young population, huge unemployment. People mostly support Palestinians and see in this conflict their governments as traitors who are doing kind of business and politics with Israel. And like we saw in spring, Jordan banned the biggest party in parliament, and now Egypt totally crushed the global march for Gaza. So my question for you is, do you expect that there could be in the near future revolutions in Egypt and Jordan, and that these changes in their regimes, politics, could lead to the military clashes between these countries and Israel?
Well, I think, Alexander, you mix two issues together in your question. Now, the relationship with Israel is different than the local domestic challenges that both countries face, Egypt and Jordan. And not only Egypt and Jordan, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Tunis, Algeria, they're all having the same problems in terms of economic and social challenges. So this, I will come back later to. But when it comes to Israel, the people in Jordan and Egypt have never been aligned and in accordance with their own regimes vis-a-vis Israel as they have been in the last couple of years. Now, of course, there have been some marches, at least in Jordan, calling the government for extra actions. But these have been marches that are called benign, cool, that serve the purpose of the government and the regime in the international community. The kind of helping the regime to explain the pressure that they are facing as a result of what Israel is doing in Gaza. But trust me, the alignment between the street and the government in Jordan and in Egypt on Israel in general have never been the same today as it used to be before. It is much better. Now, I'm not saying that the relationship on Israel with regards to Israel politics or politics towards Israel for both governments in Egypt and Jordan, I'm not saying that their relationship and the approval of the people on the street is 100% cool. After all, this is pure politics, and there are a lot of dynamics that are internal and external, local and regional, international. There are actors involved locally and internationally that would push for certain agendas, and both governments are trying to play these actors in a way that will minimize the damages. For instance, the global march. Global march does not come from vacuum. It's not that me and Alexander and Daria and Tatiana decide, okay, guys, let's go. Yes, there are people like that who do it. These are the nucleus of the process. But the process itself is somehow influenced and orchestrated by certain, governments that would try to create and establish certain push and pressure against a specific regime. And as much as people were talking about, how come you crushed this global march, you Egyptian regime? Trust me, in comparison to previous crushes by the regime, the criticism has been the least, the biggest least, the so little in comparison to before. Because people realize that, okay, why suddenly, there is this march that basically, in principle, if we have time, we can talk about Egypt and Israel later. But, the biggest concern for Egyptian regime right now is Gaza. They really want to stop Gaza. And they really want to prevent any kind of further escalation based on the crazy, ambitious, selfish vision of certain radical elements within the Israeli government. So why you suddenly push the Egyptians to a level where you want to embarrass them on an issue that they want as much as these global marchers want? They really want to stop the situation in Gaza, and they want to open up Gaza. But the way they did it, it's like a call for embarrassment for the Egyptian regime than help and support. That's why people were not very critical. And don't be surprised to, I'm not a big fan of Arab regimes, but I was in Cairo during the same period. And I could see that, people were not very, very much appreciative of such a march at this timing. So therefore, people are more aware, Alexander, of the fact that, politics is not as simple white and black as they used to think about it before. And regimes are no longer simply bad or good. They could be both bad and good at the same time. They learned a lot from what happened against Gaza and the level of support they got from Hezbollah and from Iran. And they realized that, okay, even Hezbollah and Iran had their own interests and agenda that limited their full support to Gazans, just like in principle all Arab governments have been doing in the whole time. That we cannot do more than what we can because of the fact that we are limited. And we used to call these regimes traitors because they did not give full support, and thought that only the Iranians and the Hezbollah will do the full support, until we saw that they did not in Gaza, and they turned out to have their own agendas. So people learned a lot in the last 2 years that politics is a very complicated game, and it's not simply a regime that will basically be called traitor or black just because they did not act as we people want them to. Revolutions, this is a big question. This will take, I mean, I don't know if time will allow, I can come back to it, but trust me, also people change a lot of their perceptions in terms of change, what kind of change we should expect. At the same time, the dilemma is that things are getting worse and worse. But the big thing, the big lesson that many Arabs or the Arab streets learned since the so-called Arab Spring, that changing the regime is not necessarily the answer.
Daria.
So it's not a simple answer.
Yeah, sorry. Daria, the last question.
Yeah, I actually will contribute to the question of revolutions and the resistance against the government. So actually, when you were answering the question to Han about the focus points we should keep an eye on in future events, towards the middle concerning the Middle East, you have never mentioned the possibility of, I would say, civil resistance or revolution in Iran. Is this question so far is on the table anymore? Because as I've noticed in the media, I don't know if the can be measured somehow, but the hostility towards Israel has become more, I would say, more present than the hostility towards the Iranian government. But as we have seen just recently in 2022, 2023, the civil resistance is quite possible there. And that's why I'm asking, do you see any, I don't know, possibilities or some signals that this resistance is actually possible? And even if it is, does it change anything in in the Middle East in general, in strategic way, on the landscape, the role of Iran, the role of the other countries? Yeah, so basically that's it. That's my question.
Well, Daria, I think it takes an expert on Iran to give you a proper answer, because it's not simply easy to say the status of civil resilience or civil resistance or civil resentment that is present right now against the regime in Iran. It could be a wishful thinking to say, we won't change in the regime and Iran would become better. But let's not forget that not all Iranians won't change. These people are not simply a military junta in Tehran that are oppressing the entire population as Mr. I don't know what his name is in North Korea. This is a regime that is well established within societies outside Tehran. So Daria, I think it's basically very important to make sure that we approach Iran from now on with a much more sophisticated perspective that goes beyond dichotomies, black and white, change or status quo. Definitely status quo will not continue, but change will not happen the way some people want. So it's going to be a mixture of everything. Definitely, the regime has suffered a big blow that will have its own impact on its structure. But do we expect to suddenly have a new Iran that is very secular, very liberal? Come on, I don't think. Even the Americans, even Mr. Trump will accept, because such a change, sudden fundamental change, will have serious repercussions that will really risk the stability of the entire country. And if Iran is not stable, trust me, the rest of the world will really suffer a lot, starting from Pakistan to China to Russia to Turkey to Iraq and the Gulf. And then you can imagine what impact this would have on the entire world. Therefore, I'm not sure that many in the world, in terms of governments, are eager to have a sudden change. Yes, a regime change, but what kind of regime change? How far and how much change they want? I think there is no also kind of one answer that all governments have agreed on. Therefore, it is far from us to, at least from my own personal opinion, that to expect the change that you might think of.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I don't see any more hands over there. So we will be slowly finishing this. And it's my great pleasure that we managed to have Yasar with us today. To have this view from the region to the region and just from the mid of the region, because we always argue who is the more Arab, who is the more Middle East, the North African, the Maghreb, or the Mashriq, or other, or the Gulf. So in this case, we are definitely from the very, very center of the Middle East, with the views on the trends, how they are seen not from Europe, but from there. And next weekend, that would be really interesting to put it in frame for the definitely for where everything is. So with this, we're doing an applause for Yasar. Hope that we will see him in Ukraine as well. At least we are planning this for one day. And let's hope that the Ukraine-Arab dialogue that we established with him for the senior experts, maybe we will be able to widen to the younger experts as well, to establish the dialogue that are so needed between our regions. For all our Ukrainian participants, I'm reminding you that it is our last online lecture, that the next time we are meeting with you on the weekend of 12 and 13 of July in Kyiv, we already have a wonderful set opening with the First Deputy of Minister Kislitsa. So next week, wait for the detailed schedule from Yegor, and prepare all your questions, because our speakers that are coming also promised not long lectures. University year is over with the 1st of July. So it is up to you now, having all that information from our fantastic speakers from the regions across the world, to ask the questions from the Ukrainian diplomats and experts who would be coming to you. And I hope that we would have a wonderful networking and also the practical exercises for you, as we will be testing the foreign policy strategy of Ukraine 2021 and how we can improve it around the region. Yasar, thank you yet one time, and I see you soon. مع السلامة.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And I really hope that one day we will host the new generation of Ukraine, people like you guys in the Middle East. It will be a great opportunity to establish and develop more connectivities and opportunities to interact between you and the regimes. I'm not talking about the next generation in the Arab world, at least for you now to understand better the region. And this is a very important region for Ukraine in the future, strategically speaking. So it is very important for Ukraine to develop its knowledge about this part of the world. And with the new generation, it would be the best people that we could have in order to do so. So I do hope that one day we will meet soon, inshallah. Thank you very much.